Your job as a parent is just pay attention to your child's needs, pay attention to your needs, and do your best to provide that care for both yourself and your child in the process.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Today, I'm talking with someone that I heard on a podcast that I was also on several months ago called How the Wise One Grows. And I was on speaking with the host, Holly, about this Kids Are Childfree decision, about my own child-free choice. And the request from How the Wise One Grow listeners was like, we want to hear from a mom as well. We want to hear from the perspective of having kids. And so Elissa Strauss, our guest today, was on the podcast, and I was just totally intrigued by the work that she's doing. I checked out her book. I've read a bunch of her Substack posts, and I knew that I had to have her on the podcast as well. So sometimes us podcast hosts like to poach guests from other podcasts. And of course, this is how the world works. But shout out to Holly and How the Wise One Grows. And you know what? I'll link to those episodes in the show notes of today's episode in case you want more of both me. Why not? Can always use a little more Keltie, as well as to check out Elissa and her appearance on How the Wise One Grows. So let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. Elissa Strauss is the author of When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others. She is a journalist, essayist, and opinion writer, and contributes to publications like The New York Times, The Atlantic, Glamour, and elsewhere. Thank you for being here, Elissa. I am so excited to have this conversation with you, both about your book as well as your own journey into motherhood. Maybe just off the top, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and about said book.
Yeah. So I'm a writer who has been covering the culture and politics of motherhood and caregiving more broadly for a long time now, about 13 years. And for a long time, I focused on policy and why we don't have things like paid leave in the United States, why it's just so hard to care for someone and maintain a self and also financial security and some level of autonomy. And at some point, I felt like I wasn't really getting to the root of it by just focusing on why we don't have these policies. So this book was really a deep dive into the cultural roots of why we don't really value parenting and caregiving more broadly in the United States. But I think it translates in many ways to the whole Western world and what it would look like if we did. And it came out last year, and it's allowed me to have many great conversations with people like you. So I'm excited to be here today.
Amazing. Okay. And the book is called When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others, which I will, at this point, have made a lovely introduction to. First of all, you mentioned like parenting and other types of caregiving. When we talk about when you care, and we're going to be using this term care and caring a lot, how are we defining or thinking about care?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my book, there's lots of definitions of care. In my book, I focus on ongoing dependency care. So that is a somewhat academic way of saying, right, like the care relationships you can't easily extract yourself from. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of attention, including in world religions, to kind of what I call kumbaya care, collective care, which is like a very beautiful thing. We should all care for each other. But that is different than being in a care relationship where you're kind of stuck with someone, and it's what's the difference between going and volunteering at a hospital for, or an orphanage for 6 months and having this like intense, beautiful experience, right? That's its own wonderful thing. It's not diminishing that care, but you can leave at the end. And in the kind of care relationships I write about in my book, and sometimes it's parent-child, sometimes it's adult child to parent, sometimes it's friend to friend, chosen family. They're the kind of relationships that it's not basically kind of either societally or sometimes kind of individually morally acceptable just to like decide you're done with. So that's the umbrella for care in my book.
Okay, excellent. And of course today, when we think about care, a lot of us we think about parenting and what that looks like. And that's the big question on everyone's minds right now is, do I want to have kids? Do I want to stay child-free? But as we'll discuss, I think it's also important to look at the fact that care can and should be a part of all of our lives, regardless of what we choose. And I think a lot of times when we look at, let's say, closing the door on the parenthood path, or if that's something that's not available to us, we think that there are going to be, when you talk about the unexpected magic of care, that's something we might be excluded from. And so, bit of a teaser, but I hope we'll talk about that today, how we can all partake in that. Okay. So I'm curious. I mean, I know you've been, as you mentioned, been writing about, thinking about parenthood, motherhood, both in the context of the US and broadly speaking for a long time. And were you doing that work before you had kids yourself? Or is that something that started with motherhood?
Yeah. It mostly started with motherhood. It was kind of, there was the 2010s were a time of the feminist blogosphere really took off, and there was money not a lot, but for a writer, some money at least, right? To be made, but it was the time of quick hot takes, right? And opinion essays. So I was writing in that world. And once I became a mom, I focused a lot on motherhood, and really from the place of worrying about losing myself in motherhood. So that was kind of my starting point in this journey, so to speak, that led me to the book.
Okay, yeah. And I want to hear a little bit about that. And even before you became a mom and maybe were writing about these topics, was that a big fear of yours, this sense that I would lose myself? And I know something you set up in the book as we talk about how care often has negative connotations for various reasons that we might get into today. I'm wondering how many of those you subscribe to and what your view was on being a mom, and if that's something you wanted for yourself.
Yeah. So I wasn't conflicted about wanting to have kids. I grew up one of 4 siblings, and just that was such a meaningful, rich part of my life that, I wanted to then recreate. I only have 2 kids. I did not pull off the 4, but I felt like, to me, I wanted to recreate having a house that's kind of noisy, and I do well in a bit of loving chaos. That's the kind of, both from growing up in a big family and just growing up in a Jewish American family where we're noisy, So I knew I wanted that. And that wasn't the question for me. The question was how, and the how was a very big question. And how to have a kid, it was the $1 million question, maybe even literally because of how expensive parenting can be. How to have a kid without losing yourself in it. And there was, and I covered things like the pay gap between men and women, or even more focused, the pay gap between moms and everyone else. I didn't want to contribute to that. That seemed like the worst thing that could happen to me in a way, right? That this thing that was so terrible for me, and is terrible, and I think we could talk about how we might get rid of the pay gap without getting rid of motherhood, later. But the fact that it would put me in an economically vulnerable position. And then even more for me, being kind of a writer, early 30s writer in literary intellectual Brooklyn, losing cultural cachet. That was kind of the scariest thing for me. And most of the writing I encountered, women like Rachel Cusk and her memoir, Life's Work, and a few other books at the time, made it seem like parenthood will take away from my capacity to think interesting thoughts and be creative. And that's what I wanted to have a kid, but at the same time, I was mounting a defense against that. I did not want to lose myself to it again. Yeah.
And so would you say, was there something you did going into motherhood to try and buffer yourself against that? And if so, did that work? I'm curious to hear that, first of all.
Yeah. Yes and yes, but also it came at some cost. So I just I was just having the baby. I was just being a mom to my kid. That was the plan, right? I am mom to Augie, who's 12 and a half now, which is crazy. And, but I'm not going to be a mom publicly in any capacity. That was my big plan. I didn't do any mom groups. I didn't, I didn't buy necklaces with my kid's name on it. That sounds kind of small and silly, but I think it actually symbolizes something bigger. It was like the parenting relationship would be limited to my relationship with Augie. And when I say it came at some cost, I do think that, not joining moms groups, I know a lot of people who built meaningful relationships. There was some kind of internalized, I don't know what the right, because it's not misogyny exactly, but internalized rejection or minimizing of motherhood that made me think that moms groups would be all people obsessed with breastfeeding. But sometimes they were. But yeah, just, by having this wall of resistance, I do think it protected me from feeling like I didn't manage to really breastfeed my kids that well, like being more okay with that, not letting that be like the worst thing that could happen. I was not an attachment parent, which was the fad at the time. I didn't wear my baby on my child. Like, I remember pushing Augie in a stroller through Brooklyn and feeling like there would be eyes on me judging me, which probably no one cared, but I was the new mom mind, But at the same time being like, yeah, I'm going to have my kid in a stroller because I don't need my kid physically close to me all the time. So, I think in many ways, actually, that was a win, but in small ways, cutting me off from community and rejecting motherhood in a way as something that could be an interesting subject matter. I gained a little and I lost a little.
Yeah. Would you say, it sounds like you were able to protect yourself, as you say, to a degree, and there was also some loss in that. But would you say the fears that you had around that loss of identity and what it meant to be a mom and to give care, were they founded, do you think? Like, I know a lot of people on the cusp of perhaps making this decision are thinking, I just hear, I'm just totally going to lose myself. Nothing will be the same again. I'll hardly have time to pee, let alone to do all these other things I love. Like, how much of that came to pass and how much didn't?
Yeah. So I think for me, and I think this is the heart of my book, to the degree that came to pass, it was very good. It was a very expansive experience. The ways in which my sense of self, my relationship with others, my understanding of life itself was kind of scrambled by becoming a parent and caring for my kids has mostly been in ways that I feel are positive. But I think, it seems like the obvious point, but to me, it always needs to be expressed. Like, I did not like parenting. I didn't really like parenting, it really, and wouldn't have written this book until what it became after my kids were probably 3.
Okay.
There was I feel like it's trial by fire when you have a baby. It's the hardest part of parenting, and you're brand new. So it's I know it has to be that way biologically, but it really doesn't work for a psychological journey. It's like to be thrust into a totally new identity and never sleep and feel lucky if you have time to throw a, deli meat slice down your throat twice a day. So I think that this is not, all these feelings, I have these positive feelings about care, not something I would have probably, I there were hints of them coming in, but they're not something I would have felt really until I think largely my kids, I could have conversations with them in a way. So I think there is an inevitable loss of self, but I also think that on some level, I think that we can look at that loss of self as something to be, have eyes on, be aware of, figure out the areas in which you can protect yourself from that, but also be at the same time open to, and to think of it as, we pursue these expansive experiences like meditation retreats or ayahuasca retreats or, all these things we do to just try to get ourselves out of our day-to-day mind and kind of break ourselves open in healthy ways. And I think parenting can be that. And then there's the last note I'll put on that, go back to the protection point, is that having someone around to help you makes a massive world of difference. My husband did not have paternity leave with Augie. He did have it with our second kid, Levi. And it was truly, truly night and day. And so I think if you can get someone around to be there with you during the day, that's a huge protection against that, the more destructive loss of self that really can break you down.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I want to talk about this magic that exists within care, but I feel like it's with an asterisk attached to it, like when care looks like this versus maybe something else. And I don't know if that's true. I'd love to delve into that with you, but I think, not to say what people imagine isn't true. And I think there are certainly, I would imagine, very challenging aspects of giving care, especially in a parent-child relationship. But I would also hope that there are certain ways we can experience or go about giving care that would make it, I don't know if lighter is the right word, but if you could sort of say, these are some essential things that would make this experience of giving care, specifically in a parent-child relationship, maybe a little bit, again, I don't know if lighter is the right word. Maybe you can articulate something better for me, but what would you say that a person can do to best arm themselves to have this caregiving experience?
I mean, first of all, I am so lucky that Instagram motherhood culture did not exist when I had my first child. And by the time I had my second one, I was, you kind of like overall the advice culture, because you realize, and this is the first point really, that every child is really different and that every parent is different. And you're raising your kid in within the context of a relationship between two totally unique individuals. And your job as a parent is not to take on all of society's expectations and then try to deliver it, in a beautiful package to your child. Your job as a parent is just pay attention to your child's needs, pay attention to your needs, and do your best to provide that care for both yourself and your child in the process. And so I think to the degree that it's possible, and it's so hard now with online culture to drown out these overly prescriptive ideas of what it means to parent well. I absolutely fail according to what's in the world now as a parent, because I'm not a gentle parent, so to speak. I direct with my kids. I'll yell at them when they won't get out the door. They're good kids. We survived it. Like their teachers say they're very nice and compassionate and considerate. So it's, the thing is, I knew them. I also move in between what works for one kid doesn't work for the other kid. So I think that's the first thing. Like, to what degree you could just turn down the volume and on that noise of what your idea of what being a good mom is, or what every child seems to need according to these external notions. And again, remember, it's like really a relationship between the two of you. And I think the other piece is to, at the same time, accept that, like your hair probably won't look as good for the first year of being a mom. These small things that are really important. I say that lightly, but also like I like my hair looking good.
Sure.
I don't mean that.
Me too.
But I do think like there's a little bit of it, except that the first year is its own experience, and it really does just get like your hair will look good again. That like to not view it as a failure if you're feeling a little less polished than you have before. You're in that trenches moment, and at the same time, think about the things that really do matter to you and do make them happen. I mean, I know it sounds very obvious, but I've seen it many times. A lot of moms it just starts feeling so easy for them to not demand things of their partners or to carve out time for themselves. It's like, I'll just do it. I'll just do it. I'll just do it. And you know what? Like, don't do that. Don't just do it. Like leave the situation, make sure you do make time for yourself. Again, I know it's like, this feels like the most obvious advice, but I've seen again and again where it becomes like people get stuck in the self-sacrificial mode. And when you're in the self-sacrificial mode, it's very hard to find any magic in parenting.
Yeah, I think it's so important you mentioned that, because I think when we think about, giving care, providing care, we talk about the dependency in that relationship. I imagine it's easy for us to not think about ourselves at all. And the self-sacrificial sort of giving everything up for someone else. But, and actually, this is a good question, because I feel like, especially where women are concerned, when we talk about doing things for ourselves, we often view it because it's good for others, right? And I'm almost kind of infringing on that idea a little bit right now by saying it'll be good for the parenting relationship if you take care of you. But I think it's also important to recognize that, like, you should take care of you just because you should take care of you. Like, even if it maybe is at someone else's detriment. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So one of the pleasures in my book, one of the pleasures of writing this book, and also having spoken about it now for years, I've become even more deeply acquainted with this world of philosophy known as care ethics, and have become kind of friends with some of these care ethicists. And, some of them really argue that like you cannot care well for another person if you yourself don't have a self. And so it's kind of both at once, right? It's you're protecting yourself for yourself, because we all need to have a self. And also you're modeling for your child, in the case of parenting, of like what it means to be a person engaged in the world. And if you are modeling someone that doesn't have a self, you're not teaching them to how to find their own self. And we
Yeah.
need the self for ourselves, and we need the self to relate to others. And what that means, like in practice, varies, of course, tremendously from person to person. But if you are entirely living for others, like you're not even really living for others anymore. It's when it comes to parenting. You are modeling a way of being in the world that if they followed you and when they became a parent would not be healthy for them. So
Yeah.
it's kind of really a both at one situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I also am hearing from you that there is a certain messiness in caring, and that I think we have often, maybe because of this association of like, it is holy and good to care for others, and we have these notions of what good care looks like. And of course, as you say, there are ethics to care, but it doesn't have to be, and nor, I'm guessing, can it be executed upon perfectly. And that good care is messy and is chaotic and is all the emotions. Like, can you speak to that a little bit? What it means to
Yes.
be offering care?
I mean, I think his care overall disrupts so many of like our understandings of the world and the easy binaries, because it's like sacred and profane in some ways, right? It's like you can have moments in care which feel really rich and almost spiritual, and you could have a lot of moments in care which is just like putting a dish in the sink, wiping a butt, and it's not all magic. So I think that with care, the ongoingness is such an important part of it to really recognize head on, and the relational piece of it. And what I really like about these philosophers who look at care is they took a look at a lot of the systems we use to decide right and wrong. And some of them is relying on our ideas of virtues, like I'm an honest person, so I don't lie. Some of it is thinking about kind of big morals that we all share, society rules. Maybe we might think of the 10 Commandments as an example of that, or but basically that we, in this, if we continue with the lying metaphor, we don't lie because we decided as a collective it's bad to lie. And when you're in a care relationship, neither of those really work, right? The sense of ideal isn't this like something that we thrust upon from outside. It's something that emerges in the moment with that person. It's this ongoing and relational and fluid. And so I think to, ground this a little bit in real life, what this means is that, like, when we parent our kid, that sense of right or wrong, if you're showing up every day in the care relationship with your child with some external sense of right or wrong, you're going to fail, and you're probably going to be miserable, and you're going to feel bad about yourself and have lots of shame. But if you think in this care ethics way of, it's like, oh, this is a relationship and it's ongoing. If you show up every day and you think of like, what does this person I care for need today? Who are they today? Who am I today? What am I able to give today? And what's the best we can do today? It's going to be a much more meaningful, overall pleasurable, and then also just less stressful and terrible experience.
Yeah. I can see how approaching care that way, it's going to be all those things you just mentioned, but that it changes the game from something that we can dread or feel like is thrust upon us to something that we, as a vehicle for our own sort of transformation, and that we learn and grow through. And the identity piece and changing through parenthood specifically that you talk about is it's really interesting how much we cling to how and who we are, because I hear from a lot of people, I'll often say, remember that the person you will become through parenthood is not the person you are now. And I say that as a good thing, that you'll be more well equipped, that you're going to have changed and evolved. What's important to you will change and evolve. And I hear from a lot of people, oh my God, I don't want to change. I don't want, like, we cling so much to who and how we are. And I think there's such an opportunity there to know that we're who we come out as the other side, if there ever is another side, not really, it is someone different.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm just thinking this for the first time, but it makes me realize, I think I like this idea of expansion better than change, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I really changed. And in fact, one of my favorite parts of having kids is that I am just like a deeply silly, ridiculous person. And I can be that way with kids in a way that I just can't be that way with adults, particularly my younger one. We're just like totally weird together all the time. And I love it. So that's a part where like, I would think of it as expansion. I think we talk about, you know, we talk about sometimes the practical changes of like you become more efficient and this and that. And those are nice. It's true. But I think that like locks us in, and this is kind of what we were just talking about. It locks us into this like outcome instrumentalized version of life where everything's oriented around productivity and like the bar, you know, the line on the graph going up in the right direction. And I think, yeah, those changes can happen or not happen. You know, I know some people, particularly friends that have ADD and didn't discover it until they had kids. And they're like, oh, I'm actually way less efficient because I'm not necessarily like good at spinning 20 plates at once. So I don't even think those things are a surefire thing. But I think, you know, instead of like changing my personality, I think it offered places of expansion. Some were challenging and some were fun. So that back to the silly piece, like that's a great one. It's like expanded that part of myself that I had to kind of quiet in adulthood. And I didn't even realize I was quieting in adulthood because there aren't really places for me to be that self. And then I think in the challenging places, and you know, I write about in my book, like for me, care has been a real face-to-face with my own certainty that I held, especially as an opinion writer. And so I don't feel like I change as a person, right? By acknowledging that I was walking through the world too certain. That doesn't seem like a new personality to me. It just seems that a blind spot was exposed. And therefore it feels again, more like an expansion than a change. You know, I still enjoy to ground this one. I still wrote a book. I still enjoy working through ideas and taking a position. I just think I'm a little better at it now because by having to try to see other humans in the way I've had to see them through caring for them, my kids, it's pushed me to not jump to what I now realize are quick assumptions, but before just thought were like really cool arguments for, you know, an essay I was writing.
So I know firsthand that when you are struggling with this decision of whether or not to have kids, that it can feel so lonely and alienating, that you are truly the only person asking questions like, what if I regret my decision? Or would I even like being a parent? Or what if I don't have kids and I'm lonely when I'm old? But if there's one thing I hope you've learned from this podcast, all of our conversations, is that you are most certainly not alone in this decision. And I tend to see the same sorts of concerns and fears and sort of decision sticking points coming up time and time again. And that is why I've created the Kids or Child-Free Support Series. Now, if you are not familiar with the support series, we kicked off the last series in January, and we are starting a new one this month in July. And I'm going to tell you all about what it entails. So these are standalone sessions that happen each month. They're a couple of hours long, and we tackle a very specific aspect of the kids or child-free choice. This is something different than my group program and even my one-on-one coaching, in the sense that rather than taking a broad view and really looking at how can we solve and resolve and answer this question, kids or child-free, we are going deep on one particular aspect of this decision. Whether it's maybe you are at odds with your partner on this decision, or perhaps you have a fear of missing out about what path you don't choose, we're going to be talking just about this one aspect of this choice in these monthly sessions. And how they work is you can either join us for a single standalone session, or 2 or 3 or 4, or you can get a pass for all 6 months of the series. And when you get an all access pass, you will be incentivized to do so. The ticket price works out to $30, so 6 sessions for $180, or you can purchase each individual session, or as many as you'd like, for $45 each. Now, over and above these sessions, I also create a Slack channel where we have an online community together for the duration of the series. And whether you attend 1, 3, or all 6 sessions, you will get access to that. And that's another place for conversation and where I share resources. But let me tell you, the real good stuff happens in these sessions where we're going to be workshopping and talking about the specific aspects of this decision that have got you stuck. I'm going to be sharing different prompts. We're going to be having discussion. You're going to get some notes or questions that you can reflect upon after the session. I would love to have you join us for one or more of these upcoming sessions. Again, your best bet is to get the all access pass for $180. So this is on sale now. Check it out at kidsorchildfree.com under the Work With Me tab. I will also link to the support series page in the show notes of today's episode. With regards to you and your husband, partner?
Husband, yeah.
I'm curious to hear about the interplay of that like caregiving relationship between the two of you. And again, to bring this back to if somebody's thinking about having children, I know there can be concern about, what is said versus what ends up being done and how do we balance things. And I see, generally speaking, not entirely, a lot more ambivalence with women in heterosexual relationships than men, for all of the reasons that I'm sure and some of which we can speak to about why this decision to take on care can feel weightier. So how would you suggest someone goes about navigating that? Maybe using some examples of things you've either done well or maybe would do differently.
Yeah. So, in a way, I always want to start this by thanking my mother-in-law, who raised a son who was responsible for cooking dinner one day a week in high school, who saw the maintenance of the domestic realm. So not care work, but all the domestic work that comes along with care, which is a lot, as his responsibility. So thank you, Sally. Because as part of, to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, as part of like my protective shield, imagined protective shield I erected to protect myself from losing myself in care, was making it very clear with my husband, like, this is something we'll share. And it was harder the first time when he didn't have paternity leave during that baby year because, I just spoke the kind of language of Augie when he was an infant in the way that Nathaniel didn't because he wasn't with him as much during the day. But that flipped totally with Levi when Nathaniel was around. We both spoke Levi equally well, before he could speak for himself in language. But I think it was clear to me how important it was that he participate, and also cultivating an environment where he was like allowed to be excited and allowed to have a feeling of ownership over like the raising of our children, and I think this goes back to both the gift of not living in a time of Instagram parenting where there was so much prescriptive advice. It was like, you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. And also like feeling myself personally very wary of advice and not wanting to include it in the household. And then, this one I could never endorse to people because I understand it's a more complicated decision, but oh my goodness, not breastfeeding. My husband actually wrote an essay for the New York Times, an op-ed about like the secret, talk about the unexpected magic. That's the real magic, the unexpected magic of formula feeding. Because I did not make a lot of milk. Both of my kids were almost exclusively formula fed, and then were exclusively formula fed after probably 3 months. And holy moly, when a husband can, or a male partner, a father can feed the child, it means they can do wake ups in the middle of the night. It means that you can go and run to yoga without worrying about pumping. And sometimes it's like, it's possible I would never even have come to the place I've come to and written this book if I didn't have a struggle with breastfeeding and we hadn't formula fed, because it just equalizes it from the beginning and it creates like roots, that continue to grow throughout the entire parenting experience.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Maybe would you be able to send me the op-ed? We can include it in the show notes. I'd be curious.
Yeah.
And I think, as I'm sure there can be feelings of shame or that I have to breastfeed. I need to be able to do this. And yet I have had some women saying to me, and they're quite clear in their minds, if I pursue parenthood, if I have a child, that's a route I'm not going to take, is breastfeeding. And I'm glad there's conversation around it. And it's something I want to say small and insignificant, but it's also not, obviously. It's like, I've heard how many hours a woman spends breastfeeding if they do that.
Right. And again, I'm not here to diminish if it's important to you. I get it. I was sad I couldn't do it. I understand, the health benefits, the research on it's like a little iffy, but it seems like there's some good reasons to do it. So I don't want to pretend that those don't exist. Yeah. But should you feel like you don't want to do it, I can promise you that it comes with a lot of benefits that really, I think, can last a very long time.
Well, and I think it serves as an illustration or example of like, it may not be that, but there may be something else that like questioning the way things are done, or like to your point, that your partner was able to take paternity leave with your second child, like something that we might, I don't want to say overlook, it can have such far reaching implications, I think, right down the line to this book that you've written. And like you mentioned, your eldest is 12 now, right? So that's like years down the line, but it has changed the trajectory, it sounds like, of your life and career, at least, to a fair degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the beginning, because I had this protective force around me, I really never felt mom guilt, honestly.
Good.
It was like a foreign thing to me. People would be like, oh, you left the kids home with Nathaniel. Oh, you're going away for a weekend. And it's like, of course. And my kids are fine because A, they have their father, and B, like it's good for them to separate. Healthy attachment involves separation. You connect with a child, so then your child can feel. I mean, when you manage to connect with your child in a healthy way, it means that they're able to not be with you, but still carry that connection, support, and love inside of them.
Absolutely.
It does not mean that it's a failure to not be with them every moment, or that you're creating an unhealthy attachment when you leave them for a night or a weekend or a week for an important work trip.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. You've touched on, the internet, the Instagram moms, et cetera, all the commentary, the blogs. I think this is playing, it's a big factor or force, I think, in a lot of people's lives who are on the fence, right? And we talked before we started recording about this sort of pendulum swing. I think you call it the fantasy versus nightmare sort of paradigm, or
the fairy tale versus nightmare. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit, but I think it describes super well this idea that, historically, and a lot of what we've seen and heard about being a mom and having kids has been, the Kodak moments, everything's picture perfect. It's elation. It's, your life is complete, which for some and to degrees it may be. And now we're seeing that pendulum swing to it's terrible. It's relentless. I saw a Cosmopolitan. I get the Google alerts for words like Childfree and motherhood. And there was an opinion piece written today saying every parent, even the happy ones, were telling me not to have kids. What's going on? I thought, really? I mean, parents didn't tell me that, but if people are getting this messaging, of course that's anecdotal, but like, don't do it. It's terrible. And I have people say to me, everybody's saying it's so awful. Why would I do it? And this makes no sense, right? When we think about it from an intellectual standpoint, what do you think's going on? How do you explain this? And how can someone consider this decision in a more thoughtful, nuanced way?
All right. Gosh, there's so much here, right? So, I think that part of what's going on, this is a pet peeve of mine. People say the truth about motherhood, a great new novel about motherhood. Every time I have a Google alert for motherhood. Every time I get some version of that, the truth about motherhood exposes real motherhood. It's always almost an article about having an infant or maybe a toddler or a novel or an essay, right? And that is a very distinct and unusual moment in the life of being a parent. So I think what happens is that when people are feeling the most burnt out, they don't want to feel like they're failures, and they shouldn't, because it is very hard to parent an infant and a toddler, and particularly in cultures where the parents don't get support and we're lonely and all the all the stuff that we talk about a lot of, how isolated people are these days. So I think what happens is that you get people kind of either wanting to deal with those dark feelings, not feel shame for them, and to relieve that shame by sharing them and seeing that other people feel the same, which is a really wonderful, good thing. But then it ends up, everything in our culture ends up just like the bullet point version of itself, or the headline version of itself, because this is a culture that's so much communication is fueled by social media, which isn't a place for nuance. Mm-hmm. So you get what is healthy venting, and during a legitimately hard time becomes the truth. Again, back to my Google alert, the truth about motherhood. And it's funny to me because once you start having older kids, you're like, I don't miss those years. I miss the smush of the cheeks. I miss the smell. But holy moly, it is so nice to have children. I could leave my kids home alone now. It's amazing. They can get themselves cereal. They can wipe their own butts. They shower themselves. The kind of physical, ongoing, daily intensity is not there anymore. So I think part of what's going on is that when we talk about motherhood, we're not taking the long view of it. And it's a long game. It's a very long game. It's the rest of your life. And in addition to that, we're communicating through a medium, which is social media, that extracts things or highlights things that are both the most extreme version of itself and a very simple version of itself. And we need this on some level because
Yeah.
we are trying to undo these really saccharine, sentimental hallmark versions of motherhood that also diminish motherhood, that also were actually outside looking in. Those weren't the mother stories, those were the stories we told about mothers. And I think it's hard in the current environment as moms, since what I try to do in my book, to try to navigate that messy middle, to try to not say it's all harmony and ease. And if you're not pulling that off, then something's wrong with you. But also say, like, there's something to this. And the patriarchy also erased the good parts of this in many ways by locking it into a stereotype.
Yeah. I think what you talk about there is a good segue into happiness in parenthood. I think a lot of people, and I know you wrote an excellent Substack piece recently, and we'll make sure to link to your Substack as well, about does parenthood make us happy or not? Or we sometimes see, being child-free pitted against having kids, and which will make you happier, more satisfied. You have a different perspective on things. And I mean, first of all, I'd love for you just to share a little bit. Like, is this a question we should be asking ourselves? What will make me happier?
Yeah. I mean, it's like our kind of obsession with immediate happiness in our culture. Is kind of historically new. This our idea of happiness today is so bound up in just like quick fixes of pleasure and feeling just good in the moment and not thinking long term about just an overall sense of satisfaction and good feeling in our lives. I want to quickly refer there was a New York Times I want to quickly refer to this New York Times article that came out 2 weeks ago, in which a reporter went to Finland, which regularly appears at the top of the happiest nation in the world list, and looking for happiness there and not finding this quick fix of happiness vibe at all, but in fact, finding people who feel like connected to others, a sense of security and stability, and as if their life has meaning, right? So we're looking at happiness often in a very wrong way when we think about it in terms of like, will parenting make us happier? For me, also, like, the happiness question aligns what I think is the more important question is, how is it a meaning making experience? And I think right now, overall, our culture actually, in many ways, is failing us in both honoring and raising up and identifying true meaning making experiences. I think there's a mental health crisis happening in the world. I already spoke about these feelings of isolation and loneliness and hopelessness. Like, our meaning making structures are failing us partially because we're so fixated on the happiness piece and not on meaning making. And happiness, as some research I found, often is kind of self-directed. It's something where it's like we're doing something for ourselves. Meaning making, on the other hand, is often other directed. It's connecting with others. And in that connection, it's going to feel hard sometimes. And if it doesn't, the meaning's probably not being made. And what exactly this means for each individual person is what they discover for themselves.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and again, I don't want this to come off at all as like, you should have kids, and I'm not here, to be clear, to tell people to have kids, but just to clarify like what this meant for me and some people I wrote about in my book, that, when you kind of accept the obligations of parenthood, you accept that your life is being constricted in some ways. It can suck sometimes, for sure. Again, definitely during the baby and toddler years where you might not be sleeping and it's just like hard to do anything because you never know what mood your kid will be in. It's like, but overall, long term, I think those constrictions and the obligation to others actually can be really beneficial for us. It can when we pull ourselves outside of ourselves towards the other, it could actually in its like constrict us in some ways, but again, broaden our understanding of what it means to live a good life and what it means to feel alive and what it means to have done something good and productive during a day.
Yeah. It's super interesting. It even makes me think of like creativity. And I know like having certain guardrails or parameters to work within for me always makes me more creative, right? And you think about this anecdote of somebody who finally reaches retirement age and like they drop dead 6 months later or whatever, or they don't drop dead.
Yeah.
But it's like, I know for me, if I just look down the barrel at like, okay, this is just life. There's no structure. There's no, this is why work for many people can bring meaning. There's no like, there's got to be stuff to kind of fill that in, and not stuff, not the things we go not buy on Amazon, folks, but
Yeah.
but yeah, something that's meaningful. Connection is I think connection is something it comes up with so many of my clients as something we all want in our lives, and in our connections and relationships with it is hard often. There are challenges, and yet I think most of us would agree that the most worthwhile things that we've done have not always, or generally not been the easiest. They've often been the hardest.
And I often think about how when we talk to each other about our marriages or our, romantic relationships, unless we're just starting dating that person, then that's one bucket of conversations, right? But when we've been in a long-term relationship with another, like we really understand as a society that it's all the above. And we don't see that with parenthood. We don't understand it with like the depth and texture that we understand ongoing partnerships and romantic relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame, because I think if we could put that lens on it, understand it's hard, understand there's going to be times when you really don't want to be there, understanding there's going to be times when you feel like you belong somewhere in this world, like you, through the relationship, almost creates a sense of place and a sense of mattering for who you are. And we're able to see it all, the whole stew of it, with, again, those kind of adult and adults, romantic ongoing partnerships, but we just don't see that with parenting and caregiving more broadly.
Yeah. You give voice to it so beautifully. Like you paint such a compelling picture. And I can imagine, I just want to introduce this. What we sort of started talking about is the fact that not everyone listening will choose to have kids. And yet I know even for myself reading the book, I'm thinking and I've never not known it. I am okay in knowing that I am missing something profound by not having a child and children, and I choose other types of experiences. However, I'm wondering, how can someone who is maybe leaning towards or makes that decision not to have kids still invite in this life-changing magic of care into their lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, even though my book in a way would have been easier to market if I just focused on motherhood or I just focused on parenting, but to me, it was a challenge in writing it, but I think it was worth it in the end, because to me, I needed to expand it to all types of these care relationships. Again, ongoing dependency care. And because I think that part of the problem with the way we've thought about care and motherhood is that they've been so tethered to each other. So it's kind of like there's, the moms will save us. Don't worry, moms will do it. And it's like, who wants to have that pressure on them always of being like kind of the moral conscience of society, or the person that when like all said and done, you can always rely on? That's too much pressure on one person, So like we need to distribute both the pleasures and the expansive possibilities of care and the burdens of care to everyone. And so I wrote my book that way. And I absolutely believe that motherhood or parenthood is not the only pathway to experiencing both, the struggles and the challenges of care, but also kind of the pleasure and expansive qualities. And I think, one way to do it, there's a Substack I love called The Anti-Bulletin by a writer named Elissa Strauss. And she's an auntie. She doesn't have kids. And she takes that auntie role really seriously. And she considers it from a lot of different angles in her writing. And it's like, can you have an ongoing, meaningful relationship with someone else's kid? Of course, it's not the same. Like, I think we all, I don't know if I have to say that out loud, right? But like, right, of course. But it still can be a beautiful relationship. I remember I had a godmother and it felt like I could depend on her, right? It felt like a dependency relationship. And she gave me such a deep sense of like mattering in the world as a child, and mattering that I carry with me to today. like anyone could do that for another child. It's also a real quality over quantity thing. It's not about having to see them all the time. It's not about buying them stuff. It's just giving someone else like attunement, right? Like paying real attention to who they are. And so I think in smaller ways, like be an auntie, colloquial speaking, right? Have relationships with other children that aren't your biological children or children that live with you. And then I also think like we need to care for each other in meaningful ways. And we do in small ways generally as friendship in our friendships, but I would love to see more comfort with like deeper, richer care among friends, which happens a lot in the queer community, because often in the queer community, your connections to your biological family aren't as strong. I mean, often because of prejudice and bias against queer people. So you see something among a lot of queer communities in the world of, this phenomenon of chosen family. And when you're chosen family, it's a bit bigger than friendship. Often it's the person you call if you're in the hospital, right? It's the person you call not just when you want to go have fun or just like cry about your life for an hour. It's a person you call when you really need someone. And so I think we would all be better off if we allowed that kind of connection into our friendships as well, of like neediness and vulnerability. Not easy for us, but we have opportunities to care all around us, because most people feel, especially adults, feel kind of uncared for now in the world. So it's and it doesn't have to be a huge, big life shift. It just could be small ways of expanding the possibilities of care with the people you're already connected to.
Yeah. Well, I think starting with your book is also a nice starting point for people. It definitely has, I think, helped me really consider and reconsider care in a different way, and to see the possibilities that exist within it. It certainly, I have immense respect for people who choose and are on that parenthood path, but I think it deepens it even further. And my hope is that understanding this decision through this lens, it will maybe also, provide some depth to something that it's not that we see parenthood superficially, but again, we paint it in these broad strokes that I think it can't really articulate what that experience is.
Yeah. And I actually want to throw in one more thing.
Yeah, please.
I wrote an essay for Slate that I think it was called "It's Hard Times to Be a Happy Mom," and how it's really hard in this culture, particularly in the United States and the politics of the United States right now, to out yourself as someone who likes parenting or is happy as a parent if you're a liberal, if you're a feminist. Right? There's a kind of context and language for it on the right. Sometimes that's these extreme subcultures like trad wives and whatnot, and sometimes it's within religious cultures that are generally more conservative. But near the left, it's a really weird thing to say it out loud. Like you feel like you're betraying the feminist cause in some ways, because we still have so much to fight for to improve motherhood and to focus on through the lens of feminism and the fight for gender equality. Like we need to do a lot more to help mothers. So it's like you don't want to undermine that, but at the same time, your day-to-day experience caring for your kids might actually be something that generally makes you happy. And when I wrote that essay, I heard from a lot of women who felt similar to me. They felt like they could never go on Instagram and say oh, I actually had a really nice day with my child, or this was the best Sunday of my life, just laying around the house and, making pancakes with my child. I felt totally at peace with myself, at one with the world. No one's doing that. Because it just doesn't fit into the culture right now, but they may be experiencing it. So what you're getting online and what you're getting from the most vocal sources is all the parts that highlight the roughness and impossible, all the impossible parts of motherhood.
Yeah.
But you're not getting the voices saying actually, I really like it. I still feel weird saying that out loud. I still feel almost there's something wrong with me,
no, not at all.
for liking motherhood as much as I do. It's I'm not, even though I wrote this whole book to work through these feelings, it's still with me in this culture. Yeah. So I think that's something too. Like a lot of people who feel positively about motherhood are not speaking up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is just from where I stand, but I would say the majority of my friends are mothers, and they seem to generally enjoy that path they've taken. It doesn't mean it's without its challenges. And, I'm mindful, I've got lots of Canadian friends in Europe. We chatted about the unique challenges being faced in the US, but even in that culture, there are people who are really finding a lot of fulfillment, fun, pleasure. Again, it comes hand in hand with other things, but that's like many or most things in life. So,
yeah, exactly.
Well, you can say it here. Are you a happy mom, Elissa?
I'm a happy mom. Yeah.
Yay. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up today?
Oh, I think we covered so many wonderful things.
So many things. And there's always more, but no, we covered a lot of ground. So thank you so much. Where can people find you, follow your work, find the book? And of course, we'll link to all of those things in the show notes for today.
Yeah, so I'm on Substack, Elissa Strauss. My Substack is called Made with Care. I'm also sometimes on Instagram and LinkedIn at Elissa Avery. My book, When You Care, it's now out in paperback, and it's available at bookstores and online bookstores around the United States. And it's also available in online bookstores in Europe. So
yes. I bought it myself.
You can find it online in Europe. I think it's also in physical bookstores in Canada as well, just to speak to the international audience.
Okay. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Elissa. I really appreciate you being here today and for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. I've been a little bit lax with you lately. Allow me to explain. So I get messages on Instagram to my DMs or emails pretty much every single day from you saying how much you love the podcast, how you've discovered the work I'm doing through the podcast, how much you love the conversations on the podcast. Lots of praise. Yes, it is wonderful for my ego. I always enjoy getting these messages. It makes me feel really grateful and appreciative when you take the time to reach out. But the reason I say I've been a little bit lax lately is because when I first started the podcast, if I get positive feedback from anyone about an episode or the show, I would say, I would love for you to do me a favor and leave a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the last 2-3 months, I haven't been asking as much because, it's hard sometimes as a business owner and as a podcaster to say, hey, can you do me a little favor? But a big way the podcast gets discovered is through ratings and reviews. And it helps us to reach more people. And they really do make such a difference. I also, of course, love having this sort of social proof, if you will, to be able to show people this is what other people are saying and thinking about the podcast you want to tune into. So my ask of you, whether or not you've been one of those people who sent me a lovely note in the last 2-3 months, if I haven't asked you, I would love for you to leave either a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. We are so close to cracking 200 5-star ratings or reviews on Spotify. We're 9 away right now. Can we get there in the next week? I would love to get to 200 5-star reviews or ratings, I should say, on Spotify. So if you are listening and you have not yet done so, go into the app, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating or review. It will seriously take you 1 minute of your time, and I will be very grateful, and it will go a really long way to helping this podcast get out into more people who are on the fence's ears. That was a mouthful. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.